before I get into this lovely aid here, I'm going to nerd out about the hashtag real quick. If you do get it's my favorite part about Creative Mornings is the global community that backs it. So if you have a second today, hop on there, use the hashtag, look at what other cities are doing. There's some really cool things being done. And I mean, as a chapter ourselves, we just strive to even be just as slightly as cool as all the other chapters across the world. So have a look what they're doing, and maybe it'll even inspire you to check one of those out when you travel next. And it's just also interesting to see how every city interprets the theme in their own way and really shares a different message. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Ottawa's own Michaela Alexis to the stage.
Well, hello, everybody. What a perfect theme for how I'm feeling right now. I actually started speaking about a year ago, and I thought I had it all covered. I really did, because I'm in social media, I run a company, so I've talked about managing millennials and social media, LinkedIn in particular. And then Maxine threw a wrench in my plans, and she asked me to talk about agoraphobia, which is something that I've never really spoken about publicly. So here I am, but this is a perfect venue for this. So if you see me breaking out in hives, don't be alarmed, don't call 911. It's totally normal. I do it probably about once a day. It's pretty much just a reminder that I'm outside my comfort zone, which is something that I'm pretty proud of. So, all right, well, I can still remember the exact moment when I felt that overwhelming desire just to fit in. So a little bit of background, I'm biracial. I know, I don't look it. My dad is black, he's from Trinidad, and my mom is white, and she's from Canada. And me and my mom had gone to the doctor's office, and we were filling out one of those new patient forms, which most people don't give much thought to. And I came across a section that said ethnicity. And I didn't know what that meant, so I asked my mom, what is ethnicity? And she explained it to me. And I kind of sat there puzzled, because I'm like, which box do I check? And she got annoyed with me, so she grabbed the form and she ticked off other. And in the meantime, I noticed that she actually had like a real category. And that was the first time that I felt envious that somebody belonged when I didn't. I hated being the other. So I did all sorts of weird things as a child. You know, I would tell people that I had hot dogs for dinner instead of curry chicken, because that's my dad's culture and that's what I would eat. When I went through puberty, I would put on layers and layers of clothing because I didn't want any of my friends to know that I was developing before they would. And then throughout high school, I found this new thing that I could control, unlike my race, and it would help me belong, which was my eating habits. Yay. So I developed anorexia and battled that throughout high school and well into university. When I started at Carleton University, I felt like I had finally made it. I was the perfect weight, and I had became completely obsessed with getting the perfect grades. And when I would go for an interview for part-time positions on campus, I would proudly proclaim that I was a perfectionist. Perfectionist. How many of us actually use that word without realizing how destructive it is to our self-esteem? I used to wear perfectionist like it was a badge of honor, but what I found was that it was basically my ticket to mental imprisonment. Who here remembers their first panic attack? Put your hands. I just talked about my experience with puberty, guys. So put your hands up if you remember your first panic attack. Perfect. Yeah, I think for most people with anxiety, the first experience that you have with a panic attack is as clear as any major life milestones, because it's the moment that your life changes. It's the moment that you realize that the hardest battle that you may ever have to deal with exists within your own mind, and that is scary as hell, right? Ooh, my first panic attack happened on campus. So I was in a lecture hall and I was sucking in my stomach and I was comparing myself to, the girl next to me and taking note of her outfit details, because at that point, comparison had really become a full-time job for me. And suddenly I realized how massive the lecture hall was. And all of a sudden I could hear just the tapping of people typing on their computers, and coughs. Coughs were magnified. I couldn't even hear the professor at that point. I started sweating profusely, and my hands started to go numb, and I started trembling with chills. I just got really, really cold. And that was a moment that I realized I was either dying or extremely high, and I didn't want to stick around to figure out which one it was. So I bolted out of the room, and I went straight into the women's washroom, and I just kind of crouched in one of the stalls, and I could not move for about an hour and a half. And even after then, I was convinced that I wasn't going to be able to take that 5-minute train ride back home by myself. Called my boyfriend at the time, and he came and picked me up and drove me back home. I was completely terrified that I would have another panic attack in public. And this sounds so silly now, but I imagined that strangers would point and laugh at me if they realized that I wasn't as perfect as I pretended to be. I wasn't the social butterfly that I pretended to be. I was actually an introverted homebody. I wasn't naturally thin. I was starving myself. And even the classes that I was taking and the major that I was taking, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I was taking legal studies. I was taking it to impress my parents and my friends. And all I yearned for was creative writing. Over the next year and a half, I developed agoraphobia. I'm going to explain a little bit what agoraphobia is. Does everybody know what it is? Have you ever heard of agoraphobia? Okay, let me explain it a little bit more. So it's basically an anxiety disorder that's developed with a fear of having a panic attack in public, and you feel it most when you feel like you can't get away. So large crowds, for me, it was things like movie theaters, theme parks, public transit, so buses, trains, any place where I was with passengers, and even school was really tough for me at that point. Couple more interesting facts about agoraphobia for you guys. It usually starts in late teens and early adults, so before age 35. It affects between 0.5 and 1% of the population in Canada alone. And this is the most interesting for me, at least. It affects far more women than men. And in fact, when Statistics Canada released the risk factors for agoraphobia, simply being female was listed among chronic health conditions, substance abuse, and death in the family. But so for me, even though I was constantly bound to my home, that wasn't the worst part. It was the embarrassment. How was I supposed to tell my friends that I couldn't hang out with them because I had an imaginary illness? And that shame and that guilt and that embarrassment just fed my anxiety even more. So, how did I go from being such a petrified hermit to speaking in front of you all? Well, and this is the most simple I can put it, I stopped giving a damn about what other people thought of me. I had spent about 2 weeks studying for an exam at Carleton. I was super lucky to be going to Carleton because a lot of the classes, and I'm sure it's even more so now, were you could just watch them and then submit your essays. So yay for somebody with anxiety. But this particular class that I loved, the exam had to be taken on campus. And I was about a stop away from campus, and I started feeling a panic attack coming on. And I paused for a second, and I realized, I looked around, and I just kind of submitted. I just kind of surrendered to the anxiety. And I realized that I didn't care if I was hyperventilating when I was taking that exam. I didn't care if I was trembling in front of all of those passengers. I was taking that exam. It was my exam, it was my life, and I was finally taking it back. There are moments in life, usually not just one, not just two, many, where you have the option. You can retreat into comfort or you can march into uncharted territory. And for me, it became the option to either choose to live fully or simply barely survive life. My experience with agoraphobia was a bummer, but it also transformed my life. And I wanted to share a few lessons that I learned while I was trapped in my house. Okay, so number one, anxiety taught me that each moment is a gift, savor it. And trust me, I get this. You see all sorts of articles where it's all about gratitude, but when you feel like you are dying, which is what a panic attack feels like, it's hard to be grateful. But we tend to take the small things for granted. So people will ask me, how are you so optimistic and so peppy? And number one, coffee, a lot of coffee. And the second thing is that it truly makes me feel so proud just to be standing here in front of you, because at one point in my life, I thought that this would never be a possibility. I tend to smile during my commutes like a psychopath because at one point in my life, just taking a train or a bus was a mental battle. I would actually have to spend hours mentally preparing myself for that journey, and I would usually only make it about a stop or two. And I do weird things like dancing in my office, and I find true adventure anywhere I go because I want to take advantage of every single moment that I do have that's good. So I just came back from Costa Rica, and I noticed that there's a huge similarity between anxiety and the weather in Costa Rica. And stick with me, I know that sounds crazy. But there's people that wait for the perfectly sunny days. And to be living with anxiety, you need to be willing to do cartwheels on the beach in the midst of a sun shower, because even when life is imperfect, it's still beautiful. Number two, anxiety taught me that my life belongs to me. So I spent about 27 years following a blueprint for a life that didn't belong to me. I wish I could tell you that I live for networking events and putting on a full face of makeup and waking up at the crack of dawn, but that is just not me. It's never going to be me. I like sleeping in, I like cuddling my dogs, and I love reading in the wilderness. I would rather read a book than go to a party. Same thing with success. Success for me, it doesn't equal the square footage of your office or how many zeros you have in your bank account. It's about integrating play and creativity and giving and having that be just as much of a priority as winning. Agoraphobia taught me that my anxiety can be controlled just by living in alignment with my beliefs and values and morals. Anxiety has taught me a very, very hard lesson that if you don't design the life that you want, the world will do it for you. Number three, anxiety can be a crutch or a source of connection. If you let it, anxiety will become the pilot for your life. It certainly did for me, and trust me, it was a really, really crappy ride. After learning my story, a lot of people will talk to me about their anxiety like it's a bully that controls their life. And look, I get it. Anxiety can be terrible. But you can overcome it if you share your story. Open up, talk to friends and family. I started talking about my experience with agoraphobia about 2 years ago. Before that, I wouldn't even whisper the word. The only people that knew about agoraphobia, even long after it happened, was my husband and my mom. But sharing my battle has done nothing but bring me wonderful new friends and a super supportive community. These days, if I have an anxiety attack, I tell my close friends, I tell my family, and I even tell my business partners. Why? Because anxiety feeds off of embarrassment, guilt, and shame. And if you treat it like this deep, dark secret, you're going to forever live in its darkness. Being transparent to people has brought them closer to me, and not only that, they've also been more willing to open up about their own battles with it as well. Number 4, avoid comparison and let go of grudges. It's no surprise that anxiety has been such a huge topic lately, right? Now more than ever, we are surrounded by people that, according to social media, are killing it in their careers, have the perfect family, are constantly on their dream vacation, and wake up looking like supermodels, right? Humble the poet, a wonderful poet from Toronto, Canada, beautifully wrote, "What we see in other people is the highlight reel, and then we make ourselves miserable by comparing that to our behind the scenes." Comparison nearly killed me though, and my anxiety has made me hyper aware of when I'm doing it. So if I'm on Instagram and I'm trying to zoom in, I hate the zoom feature now, trying to zoom in on a friend's bikini photo to try to find traces of cellulite, I will literally log off and step away because that's me playing with fire. Seriously though, here's the reality. None of us are ever going to be the coolest or the smartest or the wealthiest, but if you happen to be the last one, I am booking speaking gigs for 2018. But seriously, we are never going to be the best, and you shouldn't focus on being the best. Just focus on being authentically you, because that really is a radical notion in today's world. Holding on to grudges is also poison for your soul. Sitting up at 2 a.m. and thinking about the stupid thing that somebody said to you is going to do nothing but rob you from precious sleep. Look, I wish everybody was kind and loving and generous, but that is just not the reality, and it never will be. And concentrating on changing other people is a game that you're never going to win. So focus on changing and nurturing your own happiness. And at number 5, self-love is everything. And I know that sounds really hippy-dippy, but these days I choose to schedule about 3 days after I go on a work trip or if I have a vacation. And even though I am not fully agoraphobic anymore, I still need that time, because if you're cramped beside people on an airplane, I don't know if anybody with anxiety feels this after a trip, and bumping into crowds at the airport, I just need time to not be around humans. And that's okay. I used to hold myself at a really high standard, and I would be really frustrated with myself when I didn't meet my ideals. The secret to success for me has been moving away from the idea that who I am is dependent on how the world sees me. If you're sitting here thinking that maybe you're going to be happy when fill in the blank, that's a really dangerous game, because happiness, true happiness, is not dependent on a salary, it's not dependent on a position, a weight, or anything like that. It depends on you accepting your story and who you are. It starts with you, the good, the bad, and the anxious. Your anxiety does not make you incapable or unworthy. It makes you you. It makes you human. And that's something that should be celebrated, I think, every single day. I'm going to leave you now with a quote from one of my articles called A Life, Not a Life Sentence. Stop waiting for the tide to change. You are the tide. You have absolutely everything that you need to create the life that you deserve. At some point, you need to decide whether you are going to allow yourself to drift aimlessly, hoping for the best, or strap on a life jacket and swim like hell towards a shoreline. Anxiety definitely does make for a harder swim, but it will only sink you if you let it. That's all I got.